Welcome to another live reaction. Andy Staples on 3. I am Andy Staples. This is Jesse Simonton on 3 national writer, and we are talking about the Georgia Bulldogs escaping Jordan-Hare Stadium. Jesse, you and I both know that there are these days at Jordan-Hare where it feels like the 1985 Chicago Bears couldn't get out. This didn't feel like one of those days. This Auburn team's not that good. You and I talked about this at SEC Media Days, how hard it is to three-peat, why nobody's done it since 1936 in Minnesota. I'm not sure how good Georgia is.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you, I was going to start this off with true or false. Georgia should not be ranked in the top 5.
I think that's true right now. I think based on what we've seen, that's true. I mean, look at Auburn against Texas A&M. Look at Auburn against Cal. Look at Auburn in these other games. This shouldn't be this close. I don't care how tough of an environment Jordan-Hare is. This shouldn't be this close.
No, and you know what? Georgia, they couldn't set the edge in the first half. So Thorne gets a 61-yard run down the sideline. Robbie Ashford gets loose. Kirby said it after the game. You turn the ball over twice. That is how Auburn got 14 of those points there, both touchdowns set up by first a Beck interception, then you had the fumble there. I thought, the thing that was kind of going through my mind a lot in the second half is this is why in modern football, you basically throw to run. And when they started letting Beck cook a little bit, the offense got going. You found Bowers on all these crossing routes. McConkey came up with 3 clutch catches on first down. They need to keep the ball in Carson Beck's hands. They do not have a Chubb or a Gurley or one of these dudes at tailback, right now is good. Dejon Edwards is fine, but they need to pass to win. And I think coming out of this game, that's got to be the biggest takeaway. Carson Beck proved he was money on third down. That's what you got to go with, I think, if you're the Dogs offensively.
So Brock Bowers, by the way, the best player on the team. Like the
best tight end in college football history?
I don't know about that yet, but he's up there. The 2 plays in a row where he had the unbelievable one-handed catch, the one got negated because the receiver covered him up in the formation, but it was like, holy crap, the guy's a cheat code. But it's interesting in the chat, we've got a little bit of a win is a win. Our guy JD Piquel at the hard count, no bad wins. There are no bad wins, but there are wins that cause you to pause and reevaluate. And like you just said, just assuming Georgia's the number 1 team in the country and leaving them there, I don't think is a fair evaluation of what's happened this season. I don't think what they've done merits them being number 1. We've got 5 weeks of data right now. Now, if Kentucky comes to Athens and they pace them, that's a different story. But right now, we've only got what we've seen, and they fell behind to South Carolina, had to come back. They fell behind to Auburn, had to come back. If they fall behind to a good team, they're in trouble.
Yeah, well, and you know what? You know who this team kind of reminds me of through 5 or 6 weeks? It's that Florida State team coming off the national championship. They ended up going undefeated. They ended up going undefeated, but then they finally got. And maybe Georgia does slog its way to 11-0, 12-0, whatever. But if they continue to kind of play with their food in these first halves. And in today's game, when possessions are short, you don't have as many possessions. So there's more ripe for upsets. They look like they could get got. And it wasn't today. Auburn wasn't going to beat them with Peyton Thorne and Robbie Ashford throwing for, less than 100 yards again. And even though, again, Georgia couldn't stop the edge run, they were able to get the stops that they needed, both on fourth down and then late in the game.
So Matt in the chat, who's one of the hardest core Georgia fans you'll ever meet. I love my Dogs, but we're not the number 1 team. Offense is far worse under Bobo. Defensive line talent is depleted. We're good, not great. Agreed. But here's the thing this year, and I don't know how you feel about this, Jesse. I still think they might be able to win the national title because while they're not better than everybody else, they're still as good as all the good teams on their best day.
And they're going to have plenty of runway to get better. The schedule sets up thusly. They're going to again, if they play with their food, maybe they will get got. But they have a schedule that sets up. Kentucky's going to be a huge test next weekend. But they're gonna. That's not. They don't have the challenges that present. We talked about as awesome as Davis was today. They're not. Devin Leary is not out there running off the perimeter like
No.
Robbie Ashford and Peyton Thorne. And so that's asking Georgia just to stop a man-on-man downhill attack, I think, is something that remains probably a strength for that defense. But they are not as good up front, and that's what happens when you lose umpteen guys to the NFL the last 2 years, including half of the Philadelphia Eagles starting defense.
So here's the question. We got like Dr. Don in the chat with, get real, Auburn sucks, but Texas A&M beat them 27-10. Like Texas A&M playing the way they are now, if they play against Georgia on a neutral field, how do you feel about that? Like Alabama, if they're a little bit better, if they play against Georgia on a neutral field, how do you feel about that? If LSU, well, as we speak about this, LSU is getting beat by Ole Miss, but how do you feel about them on a neutral field against Florida State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Washington?
Well, I actually, again, we can only take away what we've seen through 5 weeks, but I think especially if Georgia and Bobo did learn some lessons from this game, Auburn's secondary is pretty good.
Yeah.
And in the second half, they got torched. Auburn's secondary is better than Texas A&M's secondary. It's definitely better than LSU's secondary. And so if Georgia does start to throw to run, if the passing game becomes more of the go-to in the offense, you get McConkey back, you have Rosemary Jack Saint healthy. Brock Bowers is, again, after Caleb Williams, he might be the best football player in the country. It's either him or Marvin Harrison. So, I mean, lean on that. And then I think Georgia says, hey, we probably feel like we have an advantage against some of those teams in that particular matchup. But your point stands. I mean, this is not a flawless bunch through 5 weeks.
So Mark in the chat, I don't think Beck is the guy. I actually think Beck is the guy. I think Beck is one of the bright spots. He's the one you kind of build it around. He looks very good, very poised in those situations. I thought he was excellent in the second half. I think the issue is, like you said, do you start to pass to run the ball instead of vice versa? Because that might be the key to unlock things. Like Georgia's always been one of those teams that wants to establish the run and pound you up front. But maybe just jump on somebody going through the air because they have weapons. You saw Lovett, you saw Ra Thomas make key catches, and then Brock Bowers, obviously. And why not just start there and then run the ball once you've loosened the defense up? That would probably be a better way to do it with this particular bunch that they have.
What we've seen, I mean, and again, we kind of talked about this at SEC Media Days as well. What would losing Stetson Bennett do for Georgia's offense? Well, one, they're not as explosive because they're not pushing the ball vertically as much. But they have actually been on a yards per play basis basically as good as they were a year ago. The problem is they're not as good in the red zone because they can't run the ball as well. And why is that? I think a sneaky dynamic for Georgia the last 2 seasons, Andy, is that Bennett provided something them with his legs. And that's just not Bowers' game. That's just not Beck's game.
Right.
And so to compensate for that, you need to throw the ball more. Will they? We're going to find out. There's the run the damn ball meme for a reason with Bobo. I mean, it exists.
Yeah, that's the thing. Now, here's what you brought up about Kentucky. Because if you look at the rest of the schedule, Kentucky is the one that probably is the best team left on this schedule. We'll see about Tennessee, but it's probably Kentucky. Kentucky stylistically is a bad matchup for Kentucky against Georgia. Good for Georgia. Like what Kentucky wants to do, Georgia's really good at stopping. But it's interesting because Auburn, very one-dimensional offense. Kentucky, slightly more two-dimensional, but not really. Like they're not going to play a multi-dimensional offense maybe until the SEC championship game, and maybe not even then. Like that's an interesting question, Jesse. The SEC's down. How bad does that hurt Georgia as it tries to defend this national title? Because they're not really going to get, I don't think they're going to get properly challenged, But also, I guess maybe it keeps them from getting beat because if somebody was a little bit better, they'd beat them.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, Kentucky has some really good receivers. They just keep dropping the ball.
Yeah.
If some of those playmakers can look like and play like they did a year ago, um, that could be a game. Mark Stoops is probably pretty chapped that his team, waxed the hell out of Florida, and now they're gonna get Georgia's best shot,
Of course.
because Kirby and the Dogs escaped Jordan Hare. Ole Miss, we'll see what happens with the rest of this LSU game. That could be a trickier game for Georgia come November because Jackson Dart does have the legs that could present
Mhm.
some problems. And if those playmakers, Zachary Franklin, Trey Harris, if those guys are healthy, that's an offense that can be dynamic. But we saw them also get shoved in a locker just a week ago
By
at
Alabama,
Alabama.
exactly.
So, I mean, who knows? The SEC, to your point, the SEC is people don't want to hear this, but the SEC is pretty mid right now. It's
Oh, yeah.
for all the
I
kids, as all the kids say.
I think even fans of SEC schools can accept that. I think they have eyes, and this is, I mean, look, it's not going to
It's the
be.
SEC though, Andy. I don't know.
I don't know, but it's not going to be that much better than every other league every single year. There will be years when it's not that good, and this is one of those years. The difference is when it's been not that good before in recent vintage, there's been some team at the top that was a complete superpower that just destroyed everybody. Georgia's not there right now, and so we'll see what happens with them. But this is going to be interesting the rest of the way. It's definitely not over, and I mean, I hope that Kentucky game's good. I hope Kentucky does give them a challenge. I find it very interesting that this is a situation that we're seeing because I thought going into the season maybe Georgia just rolls to number 3, and that wasn't going to be very interesting. This is going to be fascinating going forward.
Well, it's crazy because they both look extremely flawed, and at the same time, I think both of us agree there's not if we did a poll among On3 staff, hell, if you just did it with the entire AP voting block, there would not be a real consensus over who is the number one team. I think after this week,
Yeah.
I think six teams got a vote a week ago. I think as many or more could get a number one vote after this Saturday.
Oh, I think so too, and I think we may see a change at the top too. It'll
I
be
think we
interesting to
definitely
see.
will.
Yeah, and because I mean, if Washington goes and blows Arizona's doors off, I know it's not that big of a deal, but people are going to look at it and say, well, that's the team that has been sharp every single week this year. That means something. And then
Michigan houses Nebraska on the
right.
road.
Actually, let's talk about that because Michigan hadn't covered a spread all year. Michigan annihilated Nebraska. It wasn't even close. It was not, and that's what you're supposed to do when you're a national title contender. And Michigan hasn't played a close game yet. You can say the Rutgers game was close at halftime, but Michigan looks like a team that does what it's supposed to do when they have those games. Now, they've got to go to Happy Valley. So we'll see where they're at when they play at Penn State. But so far, they look very sharp. J.J. McCarthy looks great.
They have a little bit of that 2021 Georgia boa constrictor thing going on, where it may start a little slow, but then they just get humming. Today it did not start slow at all. They jumped on Nebraska immediately, but then they just squeezed the life out of opponents in the second half. Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. They ran, I think, 5 different tailbacks got carries for the Wolverines today, though. McCarthy was super sharp. Roman Wilson had an awesome touchdown catch, and he has been fantastic for them. There's been questions about the Wolverines at receiver for years. He's a senior now, but he's finally coming into his own. I think he leads the nation in touchdowns. So they're fun to watch, and I would not be surprised if they get the lion's share of maybe 8 or 9 teams getting number one votes out of the AP if they get that top vote.
Yeah, and it would be. I don't think anybody complain if that happened. Now,
no,
they still have a chance to prove themselves, and they'll be challenged. I don't think they're that much better than Penn State or Ohio State if they are the number one team, but we'll know when they play those games. But I like what Michigan has done. I like the way they're constructed. They definitely seem talented enough to win a national title, and that's That's what it takes. Another team that seems talented enough to win a national title that was not as challenged as it could have been today was Texas. Kansas comes in there, no Jalon Daniels, his back tightened up. And, at that point, you knew what was going to happen. I had picked Kansas to cover the spread, but that was with an assumption that Jalon Daniels was playing. I was still predicting a 2-touchdown loss. Texas did exactly what they should have done. Could have been a lot worse if Texas hadn't been a little bit sloppy in the first half. But again, I like the way Texas has handled business these past couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, Jalon Daniels missing this game certainly, I think, hurt it from both a aesthetic perspective, but he doesn't play defense, and the Jayhawks' defense allowed, I think, over 650 yards.
Yeah,
I mean, Quinn Ewers and Brooks, the tailback. I mean, they were just racing up and down the field. Texas has so many awesome playmakers. That is an offense that if it gets humming, it's a light show. And they ended up lighting up the Jayhawks, mainly running away with this thing in the third and fourth quarter.
Well, and they feel like a real contender now. We got them against Oklahoma next week, so we're gonna get a good look at Texas and what they are.
How do you feel about the Sooners? I kind of think they're a paper tiger. I'm very curious to see what happens with them tonight.
I feel like they have tackled better. I don't know that they're great up front defensively, but they seem to make open field tackles better than they did last year, which seems to make a big difference. I don't know about that offense against the Texas defense, against a team that talented. And, I don't know that anything we're going to see before that is going to tell us, Cincinnati had Dante Corleone, who's pretty good, and they slowed him down. They only scored 20 points against Cincinnati. So it is going to be a really eye-opening week, I think, with Texas, Oklahoma, with Georgia, Kentucky. One thing we do need to mention, Jesse, before we go, this middle tier of games, the Georgia-Auburn game is what everybody was watching. But while you were watching Georgia survive Auburn, you probably missed Baylor coming back from down 35-7. We were all composing our congratulations on your first Big 12 win, UCF Knights tweets. And we had to erase them because Baylor, starting at 3:20 in the third quarter, scored 29 unanswered points to beat UCF. So huge win for the Bears. And man, did they need it. They would have dropped to 1-4 if they'd have lost this one. But that's a happy flight home from Orlando. And most flights home from Orlando are not happy. So that's a really happy one.
I thought you were going to say folks were erasing their, tombstone columns about Dave Aranda and his job security in Waco. Because the message boards were already hot a week ago, and I think they would have been searing if you go at UCF and just get blasted. But instead, you don't get blasted, and you actually end up rallying with 26 unanswered in the fourth. Remarkable.
Well, we have a lot more to talk about. I don't know. I mean, the night just stretches on and on because the LSU Ole Miss game is already going on. But you've got Alabama, Mississippi State. It's a 9 p.m. Eastern kick. You've got Arizona and Washington at 10 p.m. Eastern. So a lot left to talk about. We got Duke, Notre Dame. So don't worry. We'll be right back.
Tennessee, South Carolina.
That's right. And we'll talk to you again.